want to do a special on the mothers of D-Day pertaining to what went on during one of the greatest, mightiest military exercises that the United States and England ever partaken of, pertaining to going up and getting a madman out of power. First of all, we have released quite a bit of information about some of the D-Day experiences. And in regard to one of those events, in trying to bring full acknowledgement of what actually happened during that era, is that it did bring out some unforeseeables, unintended consequences in regard to people coming back from the war that was not normal, who had been mentally, psychologically scarred. Not one, not two, but many, many people that come out of that era was not what we call casual or graceful people. And sometimes, in looking at a horrible event like that, in being a spectator towards looking into an event, you have to understand and recognize that sometimes it takes crazy to overcome crazy. Sometimes it takes a little aggression that turns people crazy to be able to overcome aggression. And I think that that was the case in a lot of cases in regard to those men as well as women, because it affected women's lives too as well. But the main thing to look at, in addition to their ultimate sacrifices that they made, is that it did influence families by and large, not just here in America, but throughout the world. So whenever I display what I display in honor of the 75th anniversary of D-Day, it's not in any form or fashion in a disrespectful way. It's just the pure mere fact that I feel like, in all fairness, you need to look at all aspects of war, because war has never been a glorious, glamorous thing, regardless whether it was the wars that was fought back in biblical old Bible days or the wars that we're more familiar with of today. Keep in mind that this ministry, the Windmill Ministry, is not in support of war. We are in support of peace. But at the same time, whenever all talk of trying to communicate a peaceful resolution falls apart, and you have an adversary that is out to kill you or destroy you, we recognize the mere pure fact that not only do you have an obligation in defending yourself, defending your family, but also in defending your country. And I realize that, kind of like the Mennonites or the Masons, the Amish people, they don't believe in what I'm talking about as far as patriotic duties. Or if they do, I haven't come across any. I'm sure there may be a few younger men that understand that without patriotic passion, we would not have the things that we have today. And for the German religion to come over here and to become settled in into the American land, and those not willing to put themselves in a stance of protecting our democracy, I find it to be a bit offensive. I find it to be just about as offensive as I would be the police officer down in the Florida shooting about a year ago, who stood idly by for about 55 minutes and did not dare to go inside the school, and even stopped other officers from going into the school due to the fact that he'd rather be concerned about saving his own life than he would about saving innocent lives, especially children's lives. I'm pretty sure that they're going to demoralize that guy because of his weaknesses, that they're now classifying as it being a cowardly act, or they're classifying it as it being more than just reckless, to the point that they're classifying it as it being gross dereliction. And there is a difference between dereliction of duty of a officer or a judge not doing what they're supposed to be doing in the eyes of the court, the eyes of the people. There is a difference between dereliction of duty and gross dereliction. Now, as of right now, there's no law that penalizes people for gross dereliction. And once more, I'm going to say this in the most professional, passionate way that I know that I can say it. Being raised up in an area where everybody and their brother knowed everybody, as far as a community that I was raised up in. If the abusive behavior only happened indoors, and the Hills, and the Morgans, and the Mackrights, the Willises, the Bakers, the Harrisons, the Woodruffs, the Neals, the Jacobses, the Coopers, the Whites. If those occurrences took place in a isolated area to the point that they was not aware of these type of abusiveness that was going on in children's lives, I may not be as harsh on the community as what I am, but due to the fact that I know that they know that I know that they was aware of these type of behaviors, and they fled. They went in other directions other than the right direction towards protecting innocent children. That's the reason why that I am so hurt of the fact that even the Gardners, even the Wainscots, the Robinsons, I could go on and on with names, that knew of the abusive behavior that was going on, and all of them chose to put a deaf ear to it. And as long as it wasn't happening to their children or their grandchildren, they could basically care less about old Bob's children. Danny, Douglas, Dennis, and David, the 4 Ds. So, upon to this special 75th anniversary, I felt inclined to go ahead and record this because there was so many extensive sacrifices that was made during that time of one of the greatest generations known to the world. Please listen.
Tomorrow's 75th anniversary of D-Day, when more than 150,000 Allied troops landed on the shores of Nazi-occupied France. We are taking a closer look at the women, the Rosie the Riveters, who went to work, often in factories and shipyards, building bombs, planes, and ships, while the men in their lives went off to combat. Our own Andrea Mitchell had the chance to talk with some of these trailblazing women and hear their stories.
Rosie the Riveter, a cultural icon of World War II, a symbol of the millions of women who stepped in when the men shipped out. Mothers, wives, and sisters who entered the workforce and learned how to build the weapons and transports used overseas.
While the boys at the front sang a new version of the old song, "The girl I left behind has the job I left behind."
More than 75 years later, these women have made it their mission to educate and remind Americans about the crucial role the Rosies played in the war effort.
The men had all gone off to war, and these things had to be done, and who's going to do it? It's going to be the women.
Every week, Marion Soucy, Agnes Moore, and Marion Wynn, all between the ages of 92 and 99, get together to share their stories with visitors to the Rosie the Riveter National Park in Richmond, California, the same town where in 1943 Marion Soucy was just 17 when she became a draftsman at Kaiser Shipyard.
We worked on the original blueprints, erased architect's drawings, and put in our own under direction by the four master draftsmen. That's kind of powerful stuff, you know, because they built the ships with our directions now.
Marion's older sister, Phyllis Gould, became a welder after hearing about the bombing of Pearl Harbor on the radio.
I probably knew as much about welding as some of those guys that they just hired. So one morning, I just, as my lead man would point out, you know, Joe, do this. Every time he'd point, I'd say, I can do that. And so he said, well, and it was a vertical weld. And he said, okay, give it a try. And from that time, I was part of the crew.
The shipyards ran round-the-clock daycare for Rosies like Agnes, who was a single mother of a one-year-old daughter when she took up welding.
Because I worked graveyard, I left my little girl on 2 shifts. She'd have her PJs on and would have been asleep and wrapped up in a blanket, and the women would take her in and put her to bed on a cot. There was a huge room full of kids.
Another welder, Marion Wynn, went to work in 1944. The same year her brother, Private First Class Donald Parsons, was killed, along with 10,000 other Allied troops in the invasion of Normandy.
We were just going into the back door of the house, and we saw this brand new car driving in with 2 service people in it. So we knew something happened. So they came in and told us that he had gotten killed.
Now, 75 years after receiving that devastating news, Marion, joined by her Rosie sisters, reunited with her brother, becoming the first member of her family to visit his grave at the American cemetery in France.
He's finally here.
Yeah. He's happy to see you.
Very happy. He's waited a long time.
NBC News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent Andrea Mitchell joins me now from France. Andrea, first of all, 92 to 99 and still going and living that history for so many people. I just wonder what it means to them now to be there.
It's so important to them. They feel they wanted the recognition that they counted also, that the effort against the Nazis, the effort to win the war on the home front was not as important, but very important, was critical. They built the planes that helped win the war, the bombs that helped win the war. And they started from, a lot of them were schoolgirls, college.
I remember listening to testimony after testimony around here in this area, to where a lot of the women folk would wake up and drive down Highway 89 that at the time wasn't but just a gravel road. During the winter it would get terrible towards traveling up and down, to be able to go over to Bullet Town, working there at the Milan Arsenal, to be able to help build bullets and bombs. I remember hearing testimony after testimony of women that made great sacrifices in this area to support and substantiate what was going on overseas. So whenever we take our hats off to the men who fought in D-Day, we also take our hats off to the women too as well, because without them, the other parts of the alliances would not work. And I'm pretty sure that the women over in France, England, other areas can vouch and say the same thing about how that they was supporters of a grand alliance towards defeating one of the most evilest empires that at that time was on the planet, pertaining to Nazism, Hitler, the Aryanhood. So, 2 thumbs up to not only the men, but the women in recognizing their sacrifices too as well here at Broad. Let's listen to the rest of this, because I found it to be quite moving, because this is an area that a lot of times gets overlooked and people really don't give a whole lot of consideration to. But please listen, because this was a completely different era. Women did not have the freedoms like they do today. Women didn't have the entitlements like they do today. And women really, if the truth be known, was making as much or greater sacrifices than some of the men, because a lot of them was still having to feed little Johnny and little Sally, plus go to work and make bullets and bombs, and going up against their very nature in regard to the war act that was occurring during this time. So let's listen to the rest of this, please.
Girls, or high school girls, as you saw, just getting out of school, 17 years old, and they just wanted someone to remember. You know, they're bearing witness, and one of them is 99 years old, and they know that this will be their last visit here to Normandy, their first and last visit. So they would like some recognition. Actually, they would like Congress to pass something to recognize what the women did back home.
Yes. I think they should. We also learned today that another prominent woman, Nancy Pelosi, is going to lead a bipartisan delegation to Normandy. What more can you tell us about that, Andrea?
Well, this is a bipartisan effort to show the flag, literally and figuratively, to be here in support of the people who won the war and of the international effort. And this is about showing that America really does want to lead the way. And this is Republican and Democratic, and she's the Speaker of the entire House, and we're going to be interviewing her so exclusively on our show at noon tomorrow. And throughout the day on MSNBC, we'll be able to see her reactions to this.
We only have 30 seconds left, but you have been to so many important places, important times in history. You have gone to many commemorations. For you, as you're standing there and as you've been meeting people and you know what's going to happen tomorrow, I wonder if you can give us your sense of the importance of the day tomorrow.
Well, for these veterans, they are a dwindling group, and the 75th anniversary is probably their last. And I was here in 1984 for the first big commemoration when Ronald Reagan gave that grand speech and really began to recognize the World War II veterans. And that's the aha moment when Tom Brokaw realized that he wanted to write The Greatest Generation, which now is part of our vocabulary. So having come back here and seen other presidents, it's very meaningful. It's very moving to be here. When those veterans are here tomorrow, I'll have a hard time with my composure. The only thing that I can compare this to is being there when Reagan gave the Berlin take down this fall, Mr. Gorbachev. And of course, Tom Brokaw was there the night the wall came down.
Yeah.
So we are very privileged to have these moments to witness history.
Andrea Mitchell, so many witnesses to history. Thank you so much for being with us. And that wraps up the hour for me. Ali Velshi will be back in this chair tomorrow. Look for me on Twitter @ChrisJansing. Thank you so much for watching. Deadline White House with Nicole Wallace starts right now.
Hi, everyone. It's 4 o'clock in New York as the third day of Donald Trump's European vacation enters its final hours. And on the eve of a somber and sacred day of remembrance, the 75th anniversary of D-Day, the whole world is now in on America's dirty little secret. For Donald Trump, no jab is too low, no hour too late to tweet insults, and his grasp on global affairs and domestic ones for that matter, very, very loose. As in slipping through his fingers loose. As in, he would appear to know less, if that's possible, than on the day he was elected. When pressed on a range of topics this morning on British TV. Watch.
The Queen is a great lady. When you're walking in with the Queen, and she can walk as fast as I can, but they don't do it. She walk very slowly. The royal family is really nice. But we were talking about nasty. She was nasty to me, and that's okay for her to be nasty. It's not good for me to be nasty to her, and I wasn't. I know so much about nuclear weapons. Don't forget, I'm the one that gets trained and has to study this. At that time, Hitler was virtually unstoppable. He was going through countries like cheese. In London, you have stabbings all over. Sure. I read an article where everyone's being stabbed. They said your hospital is a sea of blood all over the floors. Let me try this on.
Please try it on, that'd be great.
No, it's a little big.
We can get that. And that's fantastic.
We had a great conversation, and it was about, as you would call it, climate change. He is really into climate change, and I think that's great. I mean, I want that. I like that.
Did you listen to him about it?
I totally listened to him, and he also talked about architecture. This has been 2 days of intensive. It's not work because I like it.
That's where we start today, with some of our favorite reporters and friends. With us at the table, Jeremy Bash, former chief of staff at the CIA and the Department of Defense. Christina Greer is back. She's an associate professor of political science at Fordham University. Plus, Matt Miller flew in for the occasion, former chief spokesman for the Department of Justice.
You know, whenever you get to looking at the pros and the cons, there's really no comparison to that era that had to make such sacrifices during that time, other than the era of the wars before that. Because you keep in mind, every time that there is a major war event, the war that's going on today is more advanced than the war that went on yesterday or the day before yesterday, as far as armaments, having advanced technology, etc., etc., etc. So you can actually say that, yeah, World War I and other wars that has come before that had to be more, I hate to use the word more brutal, but in exchange of the technology, they had to be more lethal in the sense of brutality of every war. Like I said, I don't support war. I'm not a warmonger. And I don't think anybody in their right mind is. We've always supported peace and love, gratitude, the things that hopefully most considerate people consider civilized, do sought after. But whenever it does come time for an escalation, especially one that cannot be avoided, then is whenever we look up to our men and women in uniform, because they are taking the place of us towards getting their hands bloody in comparison to us getting bloody. I guess the biggest thing of all the things that hurts me here in America is to see how that the military veterans are not taken care of by the civilian life. Just like the homelessness out in California that is escalating. And to see so many veterans that are being neglected and not taken care of. Because I truly believe that if somebody would have taken a little bit of time with my particular situation, or our particular situation with our father, towards sitting down and explaining to our father, Mr. Jackson, you're going to have to settle down, or you're going to have to do something different. And even if it would have been just maybe some hemp or marijuana joints or anything that would have settled his nerves down to the point that he wouldn't have been so brutal in his discipline techniques, especially the brutality that he performed in front of the community. Why somebody couldn't have reached him. And my mother and I, we tried so desperately. The whole family did. But whenever you're dealing with somebody with this type of disorder, it's a whole lot easier said than done whenever you're talking about somebody on this particular level. Once more, we don't want to be disrespectful to those who sacrificed so dearly during World War II, because we know that without them, right now, possibly, we would all be speaking German and we would be addressing any official in a high Hitler type form. So anybody, or most people, that's got any wits about them is going to be able to look at this particular event that happened 75 years ago and admire the fact that our men and women was willing to sacrifice so dearly, so much, just for what we have today as far as our liberties and our freedoms.
Wish you'd been able to serve. Would you like to have served your country?
Well, I was never a fan of that war, I'll be honest with you. I thought it was a terrible war. I thought it was very far away. Nobody ever, you're talking about Vietnam, and at that time, nobody ever heard of the country. This isn't like I'm fighting against Nazi Germany. We're fighting against Hitler. And I was like a lot of people. Now, I wasn't out in the streets marching. I wasn't saying, I'm going to move to Canada, which a lot of people did. But no, I was not a fan of that war. That war was not something
Would
that
you like
we
to
should
have
have been
served
involved in.
generally, perhaps in another...
I would not have minded that at all. I would have been honored, but...
Let's back up and see the full phase of this interview right here that's going on.
Our country and the values that America stood for from World War II forward.
He also was asked about not serving in the Vietnam War. Let's watch that.
Let's watch this.
You were not able to serve in Vietnam because of a bone spur condition in your feet. Do you wish you'd been able to serve? Would you like to have served your country?
Well, I was never a fan of that war, I'll be honest with you. I thought it was a terrible war. I thought it was very far away. Nobody ever, you're talking about Vietnam, and at that time, nobody ever heard of the country. This isn't like I'm fighting against Nazi Germany. We're fighting against Hitler. And I was like a lot of people. Now, I wasn't out in the streets marching. I wasn't saying, I'm going to move to Canada, which a lot of people did. But no, I was not a fan of that war. That war was not something
Would you
that
like
we
to
should
have
have been
served
involved in.
generally, perhaps in another...
I would not have minded that at all. I would have been honored, but I think I'd make up for it right now.
Matt Miller.
It's a shameful comment from the president. Look, this is a week where he is over there to commemorate sacrifice, a time that hundreds of thousands of Americans sacrificed their lives to liberate Europe and some to liberate countries in Asia. And it's a concept that is completely foreign to him. You see it in the way he talks about this. It would be one thing if he said, I was opposed to that war, I was opposed to war, I was a conscientious objector. But that, of course, isn't what he did. His father paid to get him a phony medical excuse so he could get a medical deferment and not have to serve. So to hear him talk about sacrifice, or to talk about the Vietnam War in that way, a sacrifice that doesn't enter into his mind at all, at any time, is bad. This week is especially shameful, given what he's going to do tomorrow when he shows up at Normandy.
When has Donald Trump ever sacrificed anything? I mean, when has he ever reported to anyone other than his father? He's never had a board of directors. He has absolutely no shame. And that's what actually makes him dangerous. I mean, we giggle to keep from crying. I mean, but this train wreck has all of us on it. Like, he is actually driving the global train. And so when he goes to foreign soil and behaves in this manner, he does not understand the role of the United States president and where they sit in a global sphere, let alone domestically. And so this is normal for him. I mean, to even speak about the Queen and, she walks fast, is that your takeaway from meeting arguably one of the most powerful and long-standing. The Queen was alive during D-Day. I mean, this is something that, unless it has something to do with him explicitly, he's not interested, nor is he interested in learning about it. And I think the fundamental problem really is that he doesn't read. He has said that time and time again. He said he doesn't need to read because he just knows things. And as a professor, I find that to be completely abhorrent, because the one thing I tell my students, it's like, don't take my word for it, read.
How do you know what you're reading if it's accurate? How do you know if you're reading what you're reading if it's not just somebody else's thoughts or somebody else's ideals? To me, this is my opinion, and it's not going to cost you nothing. This is the wrong time to be bringing up soft innuendos about our chief and commander that's over on the other side of the pond right now representing the American people. If you're going to bring stuff like this up, in which I don't have a clue, and if the truth be known, probably don't nobody else other than Donald Trump, of whether or not the accusations that they're talking about him having some sort of I guess it's gout, maybe, pertaining to feet problems. If he was going through some sort of medical issues during the Vietnam War, then so be it. But my point is, why bring it up now? CNN was the ones that started this towards calling Donald Trump a draft dodger. Well, we know for a fact that Bill Clinton was a draft dodger. Okay? But there's, as the old saying goes, there's a right place and a right time for everything. And is this really the formal, correct time to be bringing up to the world that our chief and commander that's over there representing us right now in one of the most biggest, horrendous, courageous events that's probably ever occurred, not probably, that has ever occurred upon to the planet, is now the time to be bringing all this stuff up about Donald Trump? It's almost like a contagious disease has befallen upon to the American media. And maybe it ain't just the American media, maybe it's the world, towards attacking Donald Trump of his pre-existing medical conditions, or bringing up all these innuendos about the past. And to be quite honest with you, I don't see how the man can function. I don't see how that he can think properly, knowing that so many people has this type of bitterness and this type of hate in their heart for Donald Trump. If you had this much hate and this much adversity in your hearts, how come you didn't bring it out before the election, and how come you waited until after the election, until now he's the president of the United States of America? I have said this before and I'll say it again. Whenever it comes to the First Amendment rights, I know a great deal of people take advantage of that entitlement to the point that they abuse that position in life. Because whenever our forefathers wrote the Constitution pertaining to the First Amendment, do you really think that they intended that it was okay to curse somebody or to bash somebody simply because of freedom of speech? Do you really think that they thought that it was okay to burn the American flag out in the streets and cuss your government like it was a dog? These are the people that have been manipulated by this disease. And this disease has contaminated them to the point that they don't hold no respect for the position that the man holds. And it's not necessarily about Donald Trump this week pertaining to the 75th anniversary. It's about those who sacrificed the ultimate sacrifice during this time. And if there was some innuendos that needed to be discussed, now is not the time to be discussing them while he's over on the other side of the pond representing the American people. people, as far as I am concerned, has lost their literal minds whenever it comes to being disrespectful towards other people and disrespectful towards the President of the United States of America. They have literally lost their minds because for some reason they cannot see the damage that they're doing by opening up their mouth and engaging their speech before they do their brains and not thinking it through with just exactly what am I doing here? What kind of damage am I doing here? Because whenever it comes to doing harm and hurt to people, trust me, there is thousands of ways that you can hurt an individual and never physically lay one itty bitty finger on them. And it's as if this disease is spreading. That's the reason why I said, as far as I am concerned, the FFA or the FCA or whoever's in control of the airwaves, they need to punish CNN and take them off the airwaves while our president was over there with the Queen, knowing that there was only one major American media, which was CNN, that was actually promoting violence by creating this type of atmosphere of the protesters over there. They was citing rioting is what they should be charged with. Citing rioting. Because the information that they was spewing to those people over there in France, knowing that there was no one else over there that could pull for the proper, I'm going to call it respect in regard to what CNN was doing. They was citing rioting over in an area where our chief and commander was, and because of it, I personally believe that they should be called on the red carpet because of it. Just like these people right here, they're sitting here talking about Donald Trump. Let's listen to some more, because it's insanity as far as I'm concerned. Listen.
Lots of things to make sure you understand. Maybe, we weren't in Vietnam in 1960. We were in Vietnam well before 1950, well before 1940. We were in Vietnam in the 30s. I mean, so had he understood that? And it seems as though what's so frustrating is the people around him aren't interested or capable of educating him beyond some bullet points that have to do directly with him.
I want to ask you guys something uncomfortable. It's a serious question.
Directly with him.
I want to ask you guys something uncomfortable. It's a serious question. What's wrong with him?
Where to begin? I mean,
maybe it's not so much what's wrong with him. Maybe it's what's wrong with them. Once more, beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, okay? And you see the glass as it either being half full or half empty. Did you not hear what he said in the interview? That he felt like that he was making it up towards not going to the Vietnam War. Now he is the President of the United States. He's no longer a civilian. Donald Trump is not a civilian. A man that gives an oath towards military, or regardless of law enforcement, is not a civilian. They have turned into something else. Donald Trump is not the same Donald Trump as what he was during the Vietnam crisis. And you do have to look at the facts. The fact of the matter is, during that time, there was so many people that was protesting that war, and there was so many people that was running to the border towards being abandoning their positions or their duties here as an American citizens towards being draft dodgers. You do have to look at the facts as far as the atmosphere that was going on during that time. I don't agree with what went on after the Vietnam War, due to the fact that whenever so many of them was coming back, that not only did they protest against the war, but now they was spitting on them as they was getting off airplanes because of the war. I don't agree with how the civilian life treated the military life. I think it was wrong. I think it was horrible. It's one thing to not support something, and it's another thing to attack the people that do. It's almost in regard to the same thing that I'm going through right here. You know, if you don't want to support the Windmill Ministries missions pertaining to the founder that I believe God has anointed to bring forth a message as me being a messenger to the general public, if you don't want to support me, that's fine. Go run off into your little seclusive area somewhere and live secluse like a little spider off in its hole somewhere and leave me alone. But whenever you start coming to my driveway, when you start coming to my house, when you start coming to my road purposely to agitate, aggravate, and to make war with me, then you're violating my principles and my rights. Because regardless of how things developed here in Weakley County in regard to my brother's death and the Ridgway family and the Sheffield family and all these other heathens that was doing what they was doing, and if they wasn't doing it directly, indirectly they was doing it because they was seeing it being done and they didn't do nothing about it. It would be the same thing if you was watching somebody get raped in your front yard and you didn't even have the gall to pick up your phone and at least dial the sheriff's department or dial 911 and say, you know what, I just got to seeing a crime committed in front of my house. I just got to seeing somebody raped. You become an accessory to the crime. So this disease that they keep wanting to poke, riddle, gouge, smear, jab, demonize, dehumanize, why a sitting president is over across the pond representing us goes beyond anything imaginable. Because if this would have went on in my childhood with either the Kennedys, the Nixons, the Fords, the Carters, the Reagans, and even the Bushes, if this would have went on with ABC, CBS, or NBC, which at the time we only had like 3 major media entities at that time, if that would have went on, somebody would have scolded somebody's ass towards attacking a sitting president during the time that he was over there representing the rest of the 370 something million people. I have never seen the First Amendment that have been abused and taken advantage of, and people not differentiating the difference between respect and disrespect as I have in the 21st century in 2019. Now, once more, these are my opinions. And I've got a right to my opinions, just like you've got a right to your opinions. And if you don't want to listen to my opinions, then take my YouTube channel and discard it. You can call it spam, you can call it a nuisance, you can call it whatever you want to call it. But if you don't want to listen to what I have to say, shut it off. But if you are in agreement of what I'm saying, then we need to build an alliance. And we need to rally the rest of the people that has been blinded and deceived throughout all these years, that don't understand the difference between non-respect and respect. There's a certain element that our forefathers, our builders to this great nation, expected whenever they wrote the Constitution. And whenever you start manipulating their intent of what they intended, whenever they originally wrote various laws, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, then you're the one who is taking things out of context, and you're the one that's going to stand guilty towards doing the wrong things. Thank you for your time. Once more, 2 thumbs up to the women and men who sacrifice so dearly for what we have here in America today, 75 years ago. 2 thumbs up to both species in the Homo sapien race. God bless, and God bless America. Shalom.